back in the 80s, everybody wanted to be on Wall Street, right? Like that was the big thing to go do. Now it's start a startup. And startup in, I think, people's heads often means VC, hypergrowth, next big thing. It's kind of a glorified story right now.
Absolutely.
But I'm loving this kind of counter movement, which is not being a startup founder, but actually just being a business owner.
So let's take a step back now. All these things are so exciting to talk about, but you now at this point have so much experience, both as I would call you an entrepreneur and an intrapreneur, because I feel like the roles that you've held inside of corporate settings have been to innovate, have been to to lead product. What would be some advice that you would have both for two kind of categories? One would be the aspiring entrepreneur who maybe is starting off his business right now. The other one is this person who's in the corporate setting, always had dreams of becoming an entrepreneur, but never really, they get stuck in analysis paralysis. They're scared. They think they have to quit their full-time job to do this. What would be like some advice to both those individuals from your own experience?
Yeah, so I think, this is kind of pretty common advice, but it's definitely a mistake that I've made, which is over-architecting the solution before really knowing whether there was any demand to something. And so I see this, I have friends who are still in corporate world who will contact me and say, hey, I've got this great idea for an app. Can we talk about it? Because I'm thinking about fundraising for it. And often it's a beautiful deck and a beautiful idea, but there's no proof yet. And yeah, it's how quickly, I often think that we need to shift from, and this goes for entrepreneurs who are already doing a business as well as people in corporate. We need to shift the mindset from I have an idea to I have an hypothesis. And, I think this is what's going to happen when I do X. And it's like, well, how fast can I prove that or disprove it?
Yeah.
Because otherwise you get stuck on the idea. You get stuck on the kind of finished product in your head versus what is the thing I have a hunch about. If you have a hunch that millennial moms don't want to buy new baby clothes, but they actually want to rent them from other moms who no longer need them, that's not a product, that's a hunch, that's a hypothesis. So, what is that? How are you going to prove that? How are you going to kind of find that out before you even sketch or draw anything? I'm a designer, so I love to get in Sketch. I love to kind of design things. I'm constantly thinking about the end product, but I've had to unlearn that. I had to not just kind of go in.
Definitely preaching to the choir here. That's exactly what I tell the founders that I train. I also tell them, like, if you have an idea, it's better to test that in the market and find out that it doesn't really have market demand in a short amount of time, than to kind of chase this thing for 3 years, spend all your savings in developers. And so I think the general approach that people have, as you mentioned, that is like, I have an idea, I'm going to go out and build it. I need a fundraise to build because I don't have the money to pay developers. That's 3 levels of mistakes right there.
Yeah, I am not immune to this. I'm definitely,
No, and none of us are. Like that's what you want to do. So I think that
that's a sexy, exciting part, to be like, oh, what does my app look like? It's in the app store, but that's not a business.
Yeah, or like talk about your logo for like 3 weeks before you even like get moving. When the reality is that like people are not going to be downloading, buying, or whatever it is, the action that you're trying to get them to do, because your logo looks like this or looks like that. There might be a general aesthetic that people are more attracted to than other, but definitely a lot of the things that people think are important, like setting up the legal entity, getting all the paperwork perfect, before even testing out the market demand, what people are saying about it. So no code is very powerful, but if it's not within the context of a specific end, and if it's not including other people, you're basically just building something for yourself. And that's a mistake when you're trying to build a business, right?
Yeah.
Love that. So what other things have you learned the easy way, the hard way in your career as an entrepreneur that you'd love for other founders not to make in terms of mistakes?
To make those mistakes. Yeah, falling in too in love with your idea. That's, that's where, if we can have this shift from I have an idea to I have a hypothesis, then it's just much more freeing. You're like, okay, cool. A hypothesis is just something, to go test. Great.
Oh, wow. Love that. That brings you to the human element, where it's like, if it's an idea, you don't want to feel like you have a bad idea.
No,
as soon as you frame it as a hypothesis, because we take that as central to our identity, right? I have a bad idea. Oh, well, I'm dumb, right? Whereas a hypothesis is like, it basically has the connotation that we're doing a test.
Yeah.
And I think that, oh my God, love that. It really brings it. That's why I always say there's such a deep link between human psychology and entrepreneurship, because understanding yourself is what and kind of changing your mind, or the way that you're framing things in your mind, will allow you to either feel free and be excited about it, or feel stuck and limited.
Yeah, I definitely believe that. And that's part of the whole kind of growth mindset movement in education as well. How we can get out of some of the mental models that we have, so to free ourselves from those constrictions.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think, one of the other kind of big things that a journey and things that I'm learning right now is around the fundraising process, and even around the way that you conceptualize your business. I think, back in the 80s, everybody wanted to be on Wall Street, right? Like that was the big thing to go do. Now it's start a startup. And startup in, I think, people's heads often means VC, hypergrowth, next big thing. It's kind of a glorified story right now.
Absolutely.
But I'm loving this kind of counter movement, which is not being a startup founder, but actually just being a business owner. Businesses are startups, but you don't have to be $1 billion company. You can be just building a business.
Yeah, and I think
people startup, but it can be sometimes freeing to be like, I'm building a business. I'm a business person. I don't have to be like a startup entrepreneur who is on this kind of single track to VC and growth. There are other alternative funding methods out there right now. It's about sustainability, and if you're interested in business, it's about how do you get profit in the door, and that's not all the glorified stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's definitely like a shift that has to happen. I think that's a bit of an epidemic, this idea that everyone needs to be VC backed, when the reality is that most companies that go that route fail. Like not most, like a huge majority. And so VC will continue to fund certain things, and I think that they definitely have a space in this ecosystem, 100%. And they always will. But at the same time, I think it's important for people to kind of restructure their thoughts. People usually get into entrepreneurship because they're like, I want to work on my own terms. I don't want a boss. I want to work, like if you go the VC route, if you go the investor route altogether, like you will be accountable to someone, you will have a boss. And so I think that I'm a big encourager of like, hey, let's build, first of all, let's focus on building a company that can replace the current income that you're making at your company. Next, let's build this into a $1, $2, $3 million company where you can, if you're the sole owner, or if you're managing with someone else, you can completely change your life with just having a business that runs at $3, $4 million a year. But I don't know if you were in the cohort where a VC investor stood up and basically said, we would rather see your company fail than stay at $20 million a year.
Yeah, $20 million is a lot. I wasn't there, but like this
you weren't,
heard these kind of conversations. Yeah.
And so that's because they'd rather write it off, right, than to have you stagnate at 20 million a year, which is insane if you think about it in terms of the ambitions that the average entrepreneur has in terms of building a business, of usually let's not beat around the bush, being a millionaire. Like you can be a millionaire without having to. You can literally run your own company and pay yourself $500,000 a year for 20 years. And I love what you said about like small business, because the bottom line is that every single business is a tech business right now, or there's a software component that you have to build, or leverage someone else's. So I think that now there's this kind of like, there's this real like SMB, small medium enterprises, and small medium businesses,
yeah.
SME and SMB, basically is directly connected to what we used to define as a tech startup, right?
It is, yeah, 100%. It's all intertwined, and it doesn't have to be the VC path, but I think people think that that's the only path in entrepreneurship. And I mean, we ended up raising equity crowdfunding for our first round, and that I had an amazing experience with that.
That's so cool. That is so cool.
We'll see how that unfolds. But yeah,
there's going to be so many new investment vehicles as well coming up. We're already having discussions within the context of no code of like, well, if no code is like, is this thing where you don't need that much outside capital, but sometimes you want outside capital to be able to grow quicker. There's definitely just this idea of, okay, well, how can we give liquidity to these, financial vehicles, basically? Because in the end of the day, investors want to see money back, right?
They do.
And so in the tech world with VCs, it's like the exit, and you make a multiple on your on the investment that was made. But there are other mechanisms in which you can see liquidity and get paid for that investment that you've made. And
yeah, there's so many different models out there. I think it really kind of came to light for me when I was listening to kind of a VC talk, and they said, we only invest in things that can return our entire fund. So think about it. If you have $100 million fund as a VC, and you own 10% of somebody's company, that company has to be $1 billion company in order to get that return of $100 million. So that's why it's kind of, go for the swing for the fences companies, knowing that one of them hopefully will return the entire fund. And that's just the way that, the structure is set up. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just that not all businesses, as you said, need to be $1 billion company, or that it might not even fill the founder's goals if the goal is to kind of earn $500,000 a year and just have your own business and have that be satisfying,
or to sell for 10 million.
Or to sell for 10 million, that's equally there's nothing wrong.
I think there's a big responsibility for us to educate people about this. So one of the big things that I pride myself is basically teaching people these different paths, and not saying, hey, you shouldn't raise VC funding, but just have them understand the implications of what these different things, whether it's VC investment, raising capital from sort of angel investors, bootstrapping, grants, crowdsourcing or crowdfunding. There's a lot of different mechanisms out there, and people just have to be informed so that they can make a decision that's in line with what they want.
Yeah,
and I think that's the most important thing.
Normal, and also just not, some people are like, I'm an entrepreneur, therefore I VC, because that feels like it's the only path, and it's connected to your identity then, but it doesn't have to be,
I love that. And I think we've moved into this new era now where it's like the pride comes from like who has raised the least money and built the largest company.
Yeah,
I hope that's the new show off metric, right?
I love that.
And you look at companies like Zapier, they raised $1.3 million. They raised one round, and they're one of the fastest growing companies out there.
I have a friend who did a round of 700,000, and then they've reached profitability.
Yeah, I'm actually going to be talking to Jason from Indie VC, and them and Earnest Capital, and there's this whole other aspect of people who are basically saying the narrative behind it is, we want to write your last check. We want to help you grow. We invest in more mature companies, but hey, everyone's kind of investing in companies that are a little bit more mature at this point. And I like that idea, and so they came out with this great, they had this thing when they came out, and it was like basically like a unicorn mask that was like burning, and it was like, down with the unicorn, like, this is a revolution against that culture of like, let's all build unicorns. And I find it really interesting. I think that it's you have a lot of, I wish I had heard that kind of narrative 15 years ago when I started my first startup.
No, it's definitely, the landscape's changing, and I think for the better from a mental health perspective too.